Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. So long as men can breathe, and eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. These are the opening and closing lines of Shakespeare's sonnet number 18, perhaps his most famous sonnet. But I'm here to tell you something that might disappoint you and even confuse you. This poem is not a romantic poem. What do you mean, you might say? It's one of the most romantic things ever said. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. You're comparing a beloved to summer and saying you're better than it. And then those last lines, so long lives this. Right, this thing that I'm writing about you, O beloved, so long as men can breathe and eyes can see, this will last and preserve your beauty. We could use a little more of that kind of romance in our world, couldn't we? Well, it depends on what you mean by the word romantic. Here, come on a little historical journey with me. The word romantic has been used in many ways, in many different contexts. The root word is, of course, the word Rome, the ancient Roman civilization, kings, senators, ruthless emperors, great poets like Virgil, love poets like Catullus or Ovid. We associate so much with ancient Rome, and it's hard to kind of get out of its shadow. Even the political tales and legends that we tell and are inspired by or troubled by today are very much shaped by Roman history and the long shadow it casts. We could use the word romantic to talk about linguistic traditions. After all, French, Italian, Spanish, these we call Romance languages. Why do we call them Romance languages? Well, each of them in their own way derives from the language of Rome, Latin. It's a later development of it. English has lots of Romance influences. It also has Anglo-Saxon in it, which makes it a little different than your standard Romance languages. But when we say romantic poetry, when we're talking about poetry in the context of literary study, we don't really mean having to do with ancient Rome, and we don't mean deriving from the Latin language. Instead, we mean something particular. And no, it's not men and women in love with each other, sending each other love letters. We don't mean what we mean when we talk about a romantic novel or a romance novel. A romance novel, you can go to the romance section in a bookstore, maybe find some good books. Usually there'll be about men and women in love, overcoming obstacles. They'll have will they, won't they plots. Maybe they'll be very passionate. Maybe they'll be a little more reserved like Jane Austen. But in the end, two people who are in love with each other that want to be together will overcome obstacles and they'll get together. Maybe they'll formally get married. Maybe there will be a promise of ongoing happiness. That's not what we mean either when we talk about romantic poetry. So what do we mean? Well, in the 1780s and 90s, a group of poets in England came of age and began writing a new style of poetry. Now, we don't have time to go into everything they wrote and everything they innovated in this video, but I want to introduce you to them. These poets were William Blake, William Wordsworth, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. They would inspire, in the 18 teens and 20s, a new generation of romantic poets, including John Keats, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, and then kind of all of the Victorian era in the 1840s onward would kind of be writing in their shadow. Now, we're limiting ourselves to a discussion of English Romanticism for now, but I think when we talk about romantic poetry in the study of literature, it's hard to escape the shadow of Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Blake. Now, what did Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Blake write that were so important, that were so influential? Well, 3 books mainly. First of all, Blake, in the 1780s, began writing 2 companion volumes called Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. Now, if you've read Songs of Innocence, you know that there's often very kind of almost nursery rhyme-like poems in that. But then he has Songs of Experience, which kind of take this almost nursery rhyme very kind of innocent poetry, something that could be mistaken even for something very cliche, and he kind of dials it up a notch. Probably the most important poem here is the Tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye framed thy fearful symmetry? Tiger, tiger, burning bright sounds like a nursery rhyme. What immortal hand or eye framed thy fearful symmetry? We're in a different realm altogether. It's not even pretty, it's sublime. This concept of sublimity, of raising our thoughts up to grand concepts, both mathematical, spiritual, religious, mythical. This is something that Blake began striving for in his poetry, inspired and in conversation with Milton, it's important to add, that created in the reading public a desire for this kind of poetry and these kind of subjects. Now, Blake wasn't incredibly well received or even widely read in his time, but his poetry would continue to influence generation after generation. The other book, in addition to the Songs of Innocence and Experience, that really kicked off the Romantic movement was a little pamphlet of poems called Lyrical Ballads by two young poets named William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And these poems, which include things like The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Tintern Abbey, The Tables Turn. We're going to talk about all these poems soon. These poems really shocked the reading audience. They were more widely read. And a lot of people thought, the language you're using, Wordsworth and Coleridge, this isn't the normal language of poetry. And the subjects you're talking about, they seem strange to us. Wordsworth actually was frustrated with this. And so in his second edition of the Lyrical Ballads, which he published around 1801, he wrote this long preface where he tried to explain, what are we trying to do? And what is poetry anyway? And what are humans anyway? And it's out of this that we get an articulation of a romantic vision, not just of poetry, but of humanity and of the universe.